On this edition of Converse India, viewers, we are fortunate to be speaking to India's scholarly external affairs minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar, who has had vast experience as a career diplomat. And of course, he is speaking to us and he will be endeavoring to be candid at a time when we have some challenges on the foreign policy front. But most importantly, he's just captured all his thoughts in a very, very educative book called The India Way. Mr. Jaishankar, welcome to Times Now. Your book, The India Way, gives us a very interesting view of the challenges that India might encounter as we move forward in a rapidly transforming world. In fact, in the chapter, The Art of the Disruption, and I have this book right here in front of me, you pose the question, and I'm quoting, what can India do to advance its goals in this disruptive world? Much of what or that would depend on its handling of the two principal actors, the US and China. You then go on to a critique of the excessively cautious approach taken, thus far implying that we need to be more active so that we don't once again lose the chance to make more than incremental gains. So let me ask you, Mr. Jaishankar, what would a more assertive policy look like?
Let me answer that in different ways because that's what the book, in a sense, does. One, if we are to advance our interests, which is what I argue, we obviously need to build our capabilities, build deep strengths. We need to find better ways of dealing with major players, competitors, etc. And we need to change the landscape. We need to do all three. Now, in the past, some of it was because our capabilities were less. I would argue our confidence was also less. What we actually saw was that we were cautious about in a sense, shaping the larger narrative.
Right.
Now, today, I think that sense that we could be non-involved, I think that we have to put behind us. I mean, we can't behave the same way as the fifth largest economy or the third largest economy, which we will be one day, as we were when we were the 10th or the 15th largest economy in the world. Or it's not just economics. I mean, today we are doing so much more in our neighborhood, beyond our neighborhood, on the big global issues. So, the case I make essentially is, step out there, shape the world more actively, engage other players more confidently, be much clearer about what our own interests are, and try and, advance them.
In your second chapter, Mr. Jaishankar, in the context of US and China, you write, and I quote, in the ultimate analysis, the ability of major powers to reach accommodation will shape our times. When black swans meet grey rhinos, the very nature of the habitat undergoes transformation, unquote. Now, how has the habitat changed, if I may, and extending the metaphor, for the Indian elephant?
Well, I think the Indian elephant is realizing that the jungle and even the laws of the jungle, if you would, are actually very, very different. A lot of it obviously is going to depend on the relationship between the US and China, because I think that's going to be in many ways the overarching issue which the world will have to confront. But it's, when I say the major powers, it's not just US and China. I think we are going to see much more sharper national positions across the world. You already have a not easy relationship between the US and Russia, Russia and the West as a whole. India-China relations are definitely more complicated. And Asia itself, there are many other examples of relationships which are sharper than they used to be. So I think my message here is, for all the talk about globalization, And I think globalization was, in a sense, conceived in a fundamentally flawed way. We have actually entered a world of sharper national identities. It could be at a global level, it could be at a regional level. As I say, there's a Turkey, there's an Iran, you look at what's happening in the Gulf. So you're going to get, a much sort of sharper rub of these, shall I say, contradictions and frictions. So be prepared for a more difficult world, possibly a more bumpy ride. And again, I repeat, it's not just about us. It's about the larger environment, and I think, as I say, the habitat is going to be very different. And we've seen some very, very unexpected events. I mean, I rank the 2016 American election and Brexit as two examples. But we've also seen unfolding events whose consequences were not anticipated, like the rise of China, whose impact was vastly underestimated by much of the international community and by many people in India.
Well, that's interesting, because you do write, however, that we have entered a turbulent phase, which is what you've just told us, where a new kind of politics is being fashioned. The issue is not whether India will continue rising. That vector is reasonably assured. The question is how to do so optimally in the era of greater uncertainty, unquote. Now, is this the new kind of politics that you speak of? Is it predicated on India that is more Bharat? What are you trying to say when you talk about nationalisms, more self-interests?
Yes, partly. But again, it is partly we are looking at a world where you are going to see much sharper competition, and we have to understand that it's the human tendency is to go back. Okay, some years ago, for example, we had this view advanced of non-alignment 2.0. Okay, we aren't in that non-alignment era. I mean, if today. First of all, the world is much less bipolar and will be much less bipolar. Secondly, the China isn't the Soviet Union. Definitely from our perspective, it is not. So, one part of the argumentation is, look at this world in a sense, in a much more multi-aligned way, and try to find touch points, common areas with different powers, and use that to get your work done. But the other part which you raised, an India that is more Bharat, which is actually a phrase I use in the book. Look, we need to think for ourselves. We need to be more comfortable with who we are, what we are, make our own judgments. Our decision should not be, what will other people sitting somewhere else approve or disapprove of. I grant you, in international relations, keeping relationships smooth is part of the job. But that ability to sort of fashion, diagnose for yourself, devise solutions for yourself, and some of that is, as I say, much more independent, I would say almost self-reliant mind. So for me, that Atmanirbharta is a factor out there. But some of it is also an intellectual challenge. We've had issues which we have for many years not addressed, largely because that's the way we have been conditioned to do. Whereas our own interests, I think, demanded something else. And I would say, to some degree, some of the political developments of the last year would be illustrative of that. So, that project, if you are going to rise, okay, and I say that vector is assured, we shouldn't think of it, last 20 years we thought of it as political and primarily economic, both of which are true. But it's bigger than that. It is also cultural, it is psychological, it is who shapes the narrative, who puts forward their narrative. So, the rise of nations is a much broader, bigger phenomenon than just quantitative analysis.
Mr. Jaishankar, many in this country are skeptical of the nationalist impulse. Let's not pretend that there are no critics out there of the manner in which the Bharatiya Janata Party has gone about shaping its own vision of what nationalism stands for. They come out and say that the projection of power, both internally and externally, leads to adventurism, impulsiveness, and a brash jingoism. In that context, you have said that nationalism should not be perceived as a negative emotion. But when these people say this, how can it not be?
Well, I think the people who say this are frankly coming from a different place, often from a different era. Some would say even from a different culture. And why I say that nationalism should not be perceived negatively is, and here I speak for Indian nationalism. Okay, I mean, to me, nationalism is being rooted to the ground, defining, advancing your own interests, and I argue that Indian nationalism is, if not one of a kind, certainly should not be confused for others who are more insecure or defensive or insular, because nationalism to me is an expression of self-confidence. It is cultural self-confidence, political self-confidence, and in India that makes us more ready to do more with the world. I mean, you refer to the last few years. I would just look at our engagement in the last few years. Has a nationalistic India been doing more or doing less with the world? I mean, look at the Corona period. We sent medicines out to 150 countries. Okay, look at the humanitarian missions or the disaster relief missions we mounted across the Indian Ocean. I mean, from Fiji to Mozambique. But we are today seen as a credible first responder in the region. Now, that's not being insular, that's not being jingoistic. So, I don't think we should look. I also, and I dissect this problem in my book, there are certain regions where because of historical experiences, nationalism has a certain connotation. Okay? It can happen in parts of Europe. But that's not us. In fact, large parts of the world. I mean, you can't go to Africa and Asia and tell people don't be nationalistic. Because for them, nationalism is actually part of a journey which began when they recovered their independence.
But what do you say to those people?
To me, this is the next step.
Okay, but what do you say to those people, Mr. Jaishankar, who criticize the government? You're part of the government. Now, you're in Parliament, you face the opposition at arm's distance, because that's what we need to do in the COVID world. But sometimes it gets a bit too close for comfort, and they do say that the nationalism that the BJP sort of espouses is one which is exclusive, especially at home, and it alienates minority denominations. You're not carrying a whole country along, and if people ask you questions about your actions, whether they're projected outwards or inwards, you're branded traitors. So how does that fit in with what Mr. Jaishankar is writing in the India way?
Look, for this reason, what I am writing in India way is a very clinical dissection of a situation or an era or set of policies. Okay, the argument you are making is the politics of the day. I don't expect people in the opposition to say, "Oh, wonderful! I actually agree with you, and I think your nationalism is great, and this is a very positive and helpful worldview." Of course, they will not, and they will not because to a great degree they are actually coming out of a different viewpoint, and. Look, the reality is, why is it that today the BJP has the kind of support which it has steadily built, especially in the last few decades? because I think today we reflect the aspirations of the country, especially of the younger people. We are much more rooted to the ground. As India has got more democratized, I mean, just look empirically. Look at the kind of people today who are in the political leadership. They're very different. And I would argue much more, in a sense, much more representative of the whole of the country. So I think we must differentiate between politics and analysis here.
Okay. So they're not ethnocentric, you're trying to say. Okay, then that brings me to the next question. How distinct then is India's idea of Atmanirbharta, for instance, from Trump's America First approach or Xi's China dream? And how, sir, isn't advantaging your own interests comparable to what some of these countries are doing? And sometimes in the process tearing up the international, order that has run to at least this day by a set of rules.
No, look, I mean, first of all, let's be very, very clear. We have not done anything which is violative of any international commitment. So don't confuse us for other countries. I mean, let me clarify that up front. Second thing, look, when we talk of Atmanirbharta, we are talking really of building capacities at home which will allow us to participate better globally. And why was it necessary? Because what we have seen, especially over the last 20 years, and especially, you've seen it's a sort of a clear economic reality. We've seen large parts of our economy, manufacturing, MSMEs, actually take a big hit. And we've seen, sectors actually hollowed out. So today, if we don't have an employment-centric view of the economy, if we are not focused on building our own capabilities, then I think our ability to compete in the world would be very much less. And I think the coronavirus challenge brought that home very, very sharply. I mean, look, I'm part of the coronavirus group of ministers. I mean, when this hit us, we actually discovered, we were not making PPEs. We had, I think, 2 companies who were assembling or partly manufacturing masks. We were not doing testing. So something as vital as health security was actually dependent on the goodwill of other countries. And when the chips are down, you're not sure that goodwill is going to work anymore. And that's actually what we saw. So the idea today of Atmanirbharta is, after all, let me put it to you this way. Would you grudge me my objective of building adequate national security? Of course you will not. But I put it to you, you cannot have national security if you don't have basic economic security, or, as we discovered, without health security. And for these you need capacities. And to have those capacities, you can't let trading arrangements which are not fair come and erode, wipe out sectors of your industry, and because it's politically correct and everybody says, oh, I must also be globalized. So you're actually you're watching sectors vanish before your eyes, and then political correctness prevents you from recognizing that reality. So look, this is Atmanirbhar Bharat is a much needed reality check. I think this country needs to wake up to the fact that if we want to be a power which counts in the world, we must have capacities that count in the world.
Right.
Yeah, we must support our industry and our working class the way other countries do. I mean, look, every other government fights for its working class, for its jobs. Why don't we?
Well,
I think that's what it's about.
If you allow me to personalize this a little bit and give me the liberty, listening to you, it takes me back to when I was working in a very junior capacity to your father on the edit page of the Times of India in a very different avatar, the legendary Mr. K. Subramaniam. And he was a realist who put India first when it was perhaps not even fashionable to do so, at least in this part of the world. How much did he influence you and your thinking, Mr. Jaishankar?
Well, look, father's influence, consciously, unconsciously, if you are in the same line of business, it obviously more than rubs off. I think it's an awareness which came later on, but by osmosis you actually learn a lot of stuff. I grew up in a very political household, in a way, a very argumentative household, and after actually a first degree in science, it was natural I veered then towards political science, and by the time I joined the Foreign Service, in a way, I guess I was intellectually better prepared for it than many other people who wouldn't have necessarily gone through those experiences. And we continued to talk and argue till the last days of his life, and he was very active virtually till he died. So of course he was an influence, but at the same time, the one thing I learned from him was keep challenging everything and everybody, and all the time. Don't ever sit back and say, aha, I know the truth, or I heard this from somebody and this is what it is and will always be there. I think that if there's one thing I thank him for, it is that ability to be continuously self-critical. And I'm sure it's perhaps a little annoying to people who work with me, but I think it's a very good quality.
Perhaps
and
it influenced.
I would say he was a realist, yes.
Yes.
He was a nationalist, yes. But in today's context, particularly because after Donald Trump put America first with a capital F, I think my father would have put India first with a small f.
Okay.
Which is and I do that myself, which is, look, we are driven by national interest in what is good for India, and which we should be, but we must also be considerate of the world. We must play the long game, which means don't try to sort of handle it in a way in which there are too many bruises and hard feelings after a particular
but definitely do
issue.
Challenge.
So I
definitely do challenge.
These are some of the issues.
Yeah, but definitely do challenge, and perhaps that's the reason why in your book you've also quoted Plato. It's very interesting. In your book you begin most chapters with a quote, and the quote itself sometimes is riddled with meaning. So let me go back to that. You quote Plato saying, quote, "The heaviest penalty for declining to rule is to be ruled by someone inferior." Now, when I look back on that, have we in the last 70 years fallen foul of the Platonic axiom, especially with regards to some of our neighbors like China, for instance? And I can't help but take the conversation in that direction because it is really the dragon in the room. So have we fallen foul?
Well, I must clarify that quote, in a sense, is not a 70-year quote, but actually a 250-year quote, because I relate it to a chapter dealing with Awadh.
Yes.
And the point I make is, as in Shatranj, the film Shatranj Ke Khiladi, the book Shatranj Ke Khiladi, in a way, you have Indians who are oblivious to what is happening in the world. They are seeing an advancing power, and they are so self-absorbed in their own arguments, or in this case a game, that they don't understand the consequences of what the world changes mean. So my call there was that don't be strategically complacent. Yes, we have done well and we've had our shortcomings, it's a mixed report card, but don't sit back, and above all, please do not be oblivious to what is happening in the world, because there are very, very big changes happening. One of which is the rise of a potential global power, or with right on your doorstep. So, and it has huge consequences. The other, of course, is that the US, which has been the bedrock of world politics for many years, is again fundamentally changed its posture, its approach to world politics. That too has its consequences. So this need for global awareness,
yes.
That I would say has been a a bit of a challenge for us historically. Not again, I'm not giving you a 70-year perspective.
I understand.
I refer to what I call a Panipat syndrome, which is you allow events to come on you before you respond. We can't do that anymore.
Well,
we are entering the big league.
Okay, so then, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Jaishankar, this is your first interview to a major TV network after you returned from Moscow. Now, many people in this country have said that we allowed events in Doklam, in Eastern Ladakh to come to us. We were not aware. You had deep, in-depth conversations with the Foreign Minister of China, Mr. Wang Yi. The two defense ministers have met, so have the two NSAs. What's your assessment of how things stand at the border? And would you say that we actually fell foul of what you have so rightly pointed out, the Awadh syndrome or effect or what have you, dealing with China?
No. I would dispute that in respect of what you mentioned just now. Because look, if in a sense, I would ask yourself this question. If, after all, we did respond in Doklam, we have responded in Eastern Ladakh. If we were caught unaware, how did we respond? Now, you got to understand, look, what has happened. Let me stay with the current situation in Eastern Ladakh. If both parties patrol regularly up to the LAC, and then one party, for whatever reason, decides to increase the numbers and the equipment and so on. Now, the other party, naturally, whether you're prepared or not is tested by your ability to respond to it. Now, had we not responded, you wouldn't have had the sort of face-offs that you have seen since early May. So I don't think it's a question of being caught unprepared, because this is a sort of modern day and age. Okay, everybody has many means of tracking things and monitoring things and responding to that. But it is also in the nature of the border, because nobody really physically sits on every inch of that border. I mean, if you look at how the border is defended, is secured, you have patrolling, posts from where you go out and patrol. So I don't think we should confuse what is happening out there as though there was sort of systemic unpreparedness. On the contrary, actually, the last 5 years have seen a much better. No, let me just finish that. The last few years have actually seen a much better sort of logistic preparation out there. I mean, if you look at the roads and the facilities which the military has got for deployment. So I don't confuse a strategic, it's about strategic complacency in a long time frame. It's not a tactical sort of alertness issue. I mean, apples are apples, oranges are oranges. The two are not the same. But regarding China, I think the question which you raised, have we been complacent? I would say, again, I'm giving you the long view out there. At various points of time, going back perhaps to 1949, I think people in this country misread the consequences of the particular event. When the People's Republic when the Communists took power in China, then the developments leading up to 1962. I would even say when China embarked on the modernization and its economic rise, what that would mean in terms of its global influence. Now, some of it would be fair. I think the Chinese themselves would probably be surprised at where all they have got to, and their rise has been very, very impressive. But some of it, I think we have been perhaps much more complacent. Chinese maritime activity, for example, in the Indian Ocean, I think people were perhaps very dismissive of it 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, which they should not have been if they actually had a good understanding of China.
Okay, let me come back a little bit to the narrow focus on the LAC, if you don't mind. Let me ask you directly, sir. Do you have expectations of reconciliation and rapprochement across the LOC after your interaction with the Chinese foreign minister, number one? And most importantly, have we conceded territory to China? Some analysts say with conviction, and they cite visual cartographic evidence taken by commercial satellites that Indian troops can no longer go up to patrolling point 8, for example, in Pangong Tso, that they could access in the past because the Chinese have cut us off at patrolling point 4. Now, how does that not entail loss of territory?
Rahul. Look, Rahul. First of all, this is an ongoing issue. Okay? This is an ongoing issue. I follow what happens on TV channels, including yours, regularly. I hear many pundits proclaim many things, give a lot of wisdom out there. I listen to many of them with deep respect, sometimes realizing that opinions can be autonomous of facts. So here's my take. This is going to play out. There will be things which China has done. There will be responses that India has made. There are actually negotiations on the way. I understand the compulsions on media to know everything yesterday. Unfortunately, real life is a little bit different. So, this is about national security. This is a very complicated ground situation out there. We need to have trust in our armed forces and their ability to secure our interests, and frankly in the ability of the system, both military commanders and the diplomatic channels in negotiating with the Chinese. So don't call out a match. We are in the middle of an IPL season. You are calling out a match before it is halfway through.
Okay, but you're making it into a match, so there is definitely a match on. Now, who has the upper hand in this match, and have we conceded territory? I didn't get a clear answer there from you, sir.
Look,
and forget the media for a moment. Let me quote you.
This is an ongoing situation.
Okay.
No, this is an ongoing situation. You're not going to get a word more out of me on this.
Okay, so let me come back to, forget the media for a moment. Yes, we want the answer as of yesterday, I agree. But we're speaking in the backdrop of a curtailed parliament session. In that context, let me ask you a question that takes shape from an excerpt from your own book that reads, as India rises in the world order, it should not only visualize its interests with greater clarity, but also communicate them effectively. This book is an effort to contribute to that endeavor, encouraging an honest conversation amongst Indians without discouraging the world from eavesdropping, unquote. Now, the one logical place to begin the conversation, in my opinion, sir, and my humble opinion, would have been Parliament, at least for the government and for yourself, perhaps. Yet the government did not want a debate on the border dispute on eastern Ladakh with China. Why was that?
No, look, again, please understand, the Indian Army, the Indian Armed Forces are today in the middle of dealing with a very serious national security challenge. But the way you're putting it, you seem to suggest that this is all about some kind of debate. The debate is at the heart of it. I would put it to you, the national security challenge is at the heart of it. And let me tell you something. I think most political leaders across political parties understand that. I think those political leaders, especially who have held office, and we had a consultation with political leaders. Raksha Mantri Rajnath ji met many of them. I met some of them, and I think they all agreed that, look, in this situation, the Parliament of India must send out a strong message of support to the armed forces, and that's really what happened. So I think people, responsible political leaders get it.
Look, I mentioned this on a couple of debates. On Times Now, under the rubric of this show, Converse India, we have more engaging more worthwhile, worth watching debates, if I could be self-deprecatory here, with people who are in the know, politicians, etc. Now, they have pointed out to precedent. They said, look at Nehru and Vajpayee. At the height of the Indochina War, Mr. Nehru acquiesced to Vajpayee's demand for a debate. Why couldn't we have simply followed precedent, especially when we're not even in a warlike situation? We're not in a conflict. That was a conflict. There was also national security implications. Then when Nehru called a special session.
No, look. Rahul, life doesn't go that way. You know, when you call people to your studio and make them debate, it's natural for everybody to show how smart they are, score a point, produce a precedent. I accept that. I mean, that's what I'd do if you call me to your studio too. I wouldn't do it as a minister, but in my afterlife maybe I will. But I think when senior political leaders of political parties met and discussed this in Parliament, and they discussed it. They discussed it with the defense minister. I think the consensus view was this is a time when it was important to send out a clear message of support and solidarity, and this was the broad view.
Well, when they came out,
I would, forgive me for saying this, but I would in Parliament go by the views of parliamentary leaders rather than go by the arguments of what people say on television, including in your show.
Okay, so you will not make it easier for me to rebut those who will pose precedents in my debates. Okay, but let me tell you, sir, while in Parliament you say that they seem to have spoken in a conciliatory manner, saying that, okay, we understand. They came out and they said something completely different. They said this government is hiding facts from the people of this country, etc., because they are guilty of surrender. And you know what Rahul Gandhi said. I don't want to keep repeating that very puerile, I have to say here, puerile phrase.
Don't. I think now you are pressing the point beyond any life left in it. I think I have said what I've had to say.
Okay.
So why don't we stay with the book? You might be better rewarded talking about that.
Okay. Now, let me, if you indulge me, just for one more question on this point, sir, please, if you please allow that. You spoke to the Chinese foreign minister, but they put out a statement with their own version of events. How do you see that?
No, look, when I say something, I'm quite capable of speaking for myself. I tell everybody, if you want to know what Jaishankar said, please look at Jaishankar's statement.
Okay. I want to go back
Don't listen to what other people said I said.
Okay.
And so I would advise you to do the same.
Okay. Now I want to go back to a paragraph or a chapter or a continuous flow in your book that really gripped me. And that's about the Mahabharata. Mr. Jaishankar, you devote an entire chapter on how one can draw upon examples and anecdotes from the Mahabharata, which itself has so many lessons in statecraft and strategy. There has to be a paradigm shift in your approach to foreign policy. What lessons and example from the Mahabharata would you draw upon? I quote from your book when you talk about Krishna and you say his willingness, very important, to forgive his cousin and rival Shishupala 100 provocations before finally responding decisively is instructive. This too is a lesson for a nation with growing capabilities in the global arena. Power, especially as it grows, must be debated, projected and applied judiciously. So the surgical airstrikes after Uri in 2016 and Balakot airstrikes in 2019 after Pulwama, actions by Krishna against Shishupala exhausting his provocation, sir?
I didn't quite say that in my book. Let me tell you what, the context in which I used the Krishna Shishupal analogy.
Sure.
To me, it wasn't, he forgave him 99 times, okay? But this wasn't just about forgiveness. It was actually about judiciousness, about a maturity. And sometimes, I see in writings and debates and so on, people very casual, about we should do this and we should do that, and we should supply missiles there, we should send the Navy out there. I mean, we are today a sort of responsible country. We need to have a mature sort of ethos of debate in a way. And the point I was making here about Sri Krishna was that there is a sort of a judicial. I mean, he got the timing right. Okay,
yeah.
When he struck Shishupala down, it was actually the most impactful timing. And when the larger point was about turning to your own. I mean, the big point in Mahabharata, of course, was don't go around shopping in the world for wisdom. You got enough at home. If only you bother to look at it. Okay, which I fear many people don't. So my effort was to say, this is part of both Atmanirbhar Bharat and India, that is Bharat, saying please read your own classics, your own epics, please draw on that experience. But the other point here, the example you said, was international relations, diplomacy, politics, these are very serious matters. And sometimes I fear, to score point, people tend to make very sweeping assertions and very rash prognostications. And that's a caution I had.
So let me quote again from this chapter. As events have shown in recent times, we need to cultivate the strategic patience, as you're suggesting, required for modern-day Shishupalas. India does not need irresponsible talk at this stage of its rise. Use of force must always be the considered option, never the first one. How would you then build that into
Absolutely.
the practical of foreign policy?
Well, that is it. I mean, the two examples you cited, Uri and Balakot, were considered options. And I think there are times when you have to, say what you have to and do what you have to. But I think it's important that we strengthen our brand as a responsible, judicious power, which I use both actually Arjuna and Krishna to bring out that that message of strength, forbearance as a strength, but not forbearance as a weakness. I also make that point, by the way, that don't let the other side play you, where
yes.
You feel, I have no option, so let me do nothing, and pass it off as forbearance.
Yeah, let me quote you actually. That's instructive because it leads me into the second quote that I want to bring to you. Consider the diplomatic engagement between India and Pakistan in the last 2 decades. Pakistan indulges in nuclear scaremongering to create a moral equivalence between a terrorist and a victim. We then make the mistake at Havana and Sharm el-Sheikh of playing along. In this logic, strategic restraint apparently applies only to the victim, not the perpetrator. In fact, a narrative was even created that suggests that no escalatory dangers when Pakistan commits terrorism, but only when India responds to such acts. And so this is what you said. And obviously this is in reference to the surgical strikes and the way in which we change the rules of engagement.
26/11 happened 12 years ago.
Yeah.
I was still in the Foreign Service at that time. I was High Commissioner in Singapore. And like, every other Indian, to say I was outraged would be putting it very, very mildly. And it wasn't just, anger at what you saw. It was the years preceding that and succeeding that, where you would actually hear this arguments, when I went about my job representing India abroad. India, Pakistan, both of you need to be careful. You see, both of you must be responsible. Now, you can't tell a terrorist and his victim, saying, both of you have some kind of common code of behavior. And that kind of narrative only happens if we allow the Pakistanis to project themselves also as a victim. And in a sense, that's what they tried to do at Havana and Sharm el-Sheikh. So, I mean, we need to have clarity. And I mean, if there's one thing which I'm particularly proud of with this government, it is that this government on this matter has shown clarity from day one. So, if you look at a lot of our Pakistan debate, the debate was, should we have talks, what should be the agenda, what should it be conditioned on, etc. I mean, yes. We are not, which other country, first of all, I can't think of any country in today's world which experiences the kind of things that we do from Pakistan.
Yes.
And not to make that, the center point of our discussions, to me, is baffling. So, when people were saying why in 2015, 2016, saying, why are you going on and on about terrorism, I was actually asking myself, saying, how can they even ask you a question like that? And these are people in India who are asking questions.
True, they're still asking them. They're still asking them, no doubt. Mr. Jaishankar, the Nimzo Indian Defense is chapter 6, Managing China's Rise. I love the title, the Nimzo Indian Defense. It's from a game that I also love. But there is a quote right under that. And that quote perhaps is instructive. You talk Chinese really back to the Chinese. The wise win before the fight, while the ignorant fight to win. This is from Zhu Liang. Excuse my pronunciation, but he was a Chinese ancient politician, historian, many things.
Three kingdoms is like the Mahabharata of China, you could say.
So what's the message in this? What's the message in this? I'm seeing something
this guy is the premier strategist.
Yeah. So what's the message to Beijing? What's the message to Beijing? What's the message to people who are expansionists?
No, look, look, I wrote this book over a period of time, so don't link it up with anything which is happening today or yesterday or last month.
Sure.
Okay. My point is twofold here. Often a lot of this is about mind games. So the quote I put from Zhuge Liang is this, play the mind game well. If you actually have played it well, you won before the game has even begun. Okay? So, and we've heard, and mind you, that's happened to some degree with some people. Often I hear the argument, country X is too big, let's not challenge them. This initiative is got so much support, we have to join it. So if you make something appear inevitable, undefeatable, it has a sort of a power of its own. And I've said, if I were to look back at the last 5-6 years of foreign policy, and Rahul, you've been very much, part of the sort of the media in those years.
Yes.
Ask yourself how many times have we been getting this public advice saying don't do this because you'll be alone or others won't join you or that will work out or you can't stand up to a particular country. That's really how you play those mind games. And so part of it is I am trying to make people understand that a lot of our the debate, the argumentation between India and China, we must factor in the mind games that China will play. They're very good at it, and it's very much part of the statecraft. The second point is also prepare for it.
Yes.
We were speaking about the border. Everybody is today waking up to the border, and rightly they should. But how many people have asked themselves this question in the last 20 years? What are we doing? What is the level of our preparation? Can we assess how much have we progressed on our plans, etc.? The reality is that our border infrastructure is very, very poor compared to what the Chinese have built on their side. And till 4 or 5 years ago, I don't think it got the resources and the attention that it deserved. I mean, if I were to, give you, I mean, look at even a simple thing like a budget. Budget has, I think, gone up twice, thrice in the last many years. If you look at your capacities, it is the road building you are doing, the bridge building you are doing. So if you don't prepare for a contestation, you're not going to win that contest.
Well, it's been a very engaging conversation, a very good conversation with you, Mr. Jaishankar. Time has really flown. I've just been told that we've exceeded or getting close to exceeding 1 hour. The India way, I can say with some reassurance to our viewers, is being crafted by a very able mind who's good at playing the games. We leave it at that. Thank you so much, Mr. Jaishankar. Thank you.